I remember Leigh Bowery coming down, turning up with this big outfit and walking through the crowd, and these two indie girls went, "Oh, look at his fat ass." I just thought, that's Leigh Bowery.
I am Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, a podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories they created there, and the people that they used to know. Smashing was a club night that found itself at the epicentre of the Britpop scene, and though it wasn't a queer night, had what my guest and co-founder Martin Green calls a queer sensibility. With regulars including Blur, Oasis, Pulp and Leigh Bowery, it was a club that quickly became the place to be seen and was thriving between 1991 and 1996 in various venues across London. To help promote his new compilation, Supersonic's 40 Junkshop Britpop Greats, I caught up with Martin to find out about the club's origins, Oasis's first time there, touring with Pulp, and I also embarrassingly fangirl about the band Shampoo for about 5 minutes.
We just set it up because we were sort of bored of what was going on in clubs. They'd become very predictable and pedestrian. House music was very dominant. And at the same time, we set up Trade set up, which was kind of a kind of gay house club. Because before then, a lot of gay people hadn't massively got into house music. They were still into high energy. And so Trade was very much a kind of house taking club.
Yeah.
But we'd been bored of house music because we'd been going to house clubs a bit earlier in the 80s. So we wanted to do a club where we mixed up all kinds of different styles of music, and that wasn't about drug taking, and it was much more about a party. So it was almost like a party in your bedroom. So we'd play all kinds of different music, punk, new wave, electro, bit of disco, Burt Bacharach, film soundtracks, all kinds of different things. And we'd mash them all up. So you didn't know what was going to come next. And the first night we did it, there was a 70s disco night on in the venue, and they'd finished and moved, and we took over. So the first night, I had a queue of people in afro wigs coming up to complain about the music. We can't stand the music, it's terrible, turn it off, it's awful, what are you doing? So we just ignored it. So then the following week, there was about 30 people in our club. But it was a fantastic night.
What, so the other club had moved but didn't tell anyone?
No, they'd moved, yeah, but this was the pre-internet. People didn't really, you'd find out, unless you read your flyer in detail or picked one up, you know, people didn't really know what was going on. You basically had two options. You had a flyer or time out.
Uh-huh.
So if you hadn't have looked at time out or picked up a flyer saying we're moving, you didn't know what was going on.
I just imagine all these angry people in flares and afro wigs.
They were really angry, hated it. And we were playing things like X-Ray Specs, and we played things like Giorgio Moroder and things like that, but they didn't want that kind of disco. You know, they wanted sort of car wash disco.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the following week was very quiet, but we had a really good time. And words started to get around London that there was this interesting night happening on a Wednesday night. And people like Leigh Bowery would come down, and Suede started coming down, and Pulp started coming down, and Blur started coming down, and Pete Burns, and all kinds of funny mix of people would come to the club and hang out and dance around. And gradually these little bands, these indie bands that I was mentioning, who were just sort of, they rarely charted, started to have some chart success. The first one was Suede. So Suede had this had some chart success and a few hits, and we got asked to DJ for them, so we DJed for Suede, and that started to take off, and then Blur started to take off, and then Oasis started to take off, and they used to come down a bit, and then Pulp started to take off, and I was Pulp's tour DJ, so I saw that really take off, and it was a very queer scene, although it wasn't strictly gay. It was full of people. It was full of gay people that didn't want the house music all night long.
Yeah.
But of straight people that didn't want house music all night long. But the linking, what linked everybody was an openness in terms of musical taste, and also we encouraged people to dress up. So at the time, the rave thing was still going. It was all jeans and t-shirts. So we were all in suits and kipper ties, and people were all dressed up. So lots of charity shop clothes. And,
when charity shops were still good.
Yeah, before it was called vintage. When they were cheap. So it was very much a movement and a scene, and then it started to take off. We started getting busier and busier.
Yeah.
But
so before we get into it getting busier, what was that like in the first few weeks when there was only like 30, 40 people showing up, and kind of how did that feel?
Oh, it was brilliant because we had this great big venue, and we'd do the Okie Kokie, and we'd do the conga around the venue, and it was absolutely brilliant. And then we had Rankin, the photographer Rankin, who was just out of college, in a corner taking photos of everybody. So, and Jefferson Hack from Days of Confused, they just set that up, and they did little features and things. So it was really good. It was really good fun, and people really dressed up. And
so there wasn't like extra pressure from the venue to bring more people in, or there wasn't that kind of.
It was Wednesday night, and in a way, London was like the way it's suddenly become now because of the lockdown. It was very quiet. You had all these mothballed venues, which were terrific. This was an old disco, and it was the actual venue where Taboo used to be in '85. It was called Maximus. So it was a big old disco, and they were just sat empty because there'd been a big recession. No one had any money. But people still kind of wanted to go out and do things. So we didn't take advantage of it, but we found that we could get these fantastic venues rent free and do what we wanted. So we were at Maximus for a while, and it did build up. We put acts on there, bands on, and it sort of took off. And then we moved to an old strip club called the Gaslight of St. James in Mayfair, and that was really good fun. And then and it was like red velvet booths and kind of Victorian kind of style, and a little light up dance floor. And that's when the Blur boys all came down, and Denim and those bands started to come down. And then they started to get some success, because at Maximus it was Suede used to come and hang out down there. And then at the Gaslight, it was Blur and Denim, and they started getting some success. And then we moved to the Eve Club, which was this beautiful place in Regent Street, where Christine Keeley used to work. And that had the big light-up dance floor, which elevated off the floor and became a stage. And Pulp used to come down there all the time, as well as some members of Suede and Blur. Everyone was part of this indie gang, and then they all started getting this success. And the club really took off, and all their careers really took off. So before, they were just all playing in like little venues in Camden and stuff, and doing little. It was the indie scene rarely bothered the mainstream charts. I mean, you had the Smiths were like the biggest indie band of the '80s, and they never had a number one hit. They were normally in the sort of top 10, It didn't become they were like a cult thing, because while you had the Smiths going on, you had Paul Young and Simply Red and all that kind of commercial stuff. Indie was always independent from, commercial success. But then these indie bands suddenly started getting commercial success and, front page of the tabloids and all those kind of things.
Yeah, it was just like, must have been really strange to have had all those people that you knew suddenly thrust into this spotlight that no one was maybe anticipating for those bands.
Yeah, it was a very odd time. And remember, the thing is, none of those people thought they were going to get that level of success that they did. And the majority of them, apart from Oasis, but the majority of those bands, ones that I've put on the Supersonics album, came from art school backgrounds. So they had quite a queer aesthetic, even though a lot of them were straight. And there was also a lot of women in bands then. So I wanted to kind of readdress that with the album. And because Britpop has kind of been rewritten as this laddie guitar scene. And actually, it wasn't. It became that later on. But initially, it was lots of women. There was a kind of queercore part of it. There was a lot of electronics. There was a lot of experimentation. And that's what I wanted to reflect with the Supersonics album, that kind of diversity. And it was very anti-America. It was very anti-grunge. It was very into dressing up and being smart and European as well. It wasn't like a British. It was British in terms of kind of art school anarchy and kind of acerbic wits. It was like that, but it wasn't. It was very kind of European in that kind of European mod feel.
And so that was kind of going on in the music scene. What was happening in the gay scene at that time? Because you talked about Trade opening, and that was mostly house music. Was the scene kind of quite cookie cutter at that stage, like mostly the same types of venues?
Yeah, the gay scene had gone. The gay scene, Trade and FF and those clubs were very dominant. So there wasn't really a queer alternative. We were kind of the queer alternative. So the kind of gay people that didn't want all that came to our club. And then while we were running, Adrian, one of the promoters, used to run a club called the Kit Kat Club with Simon Hobart. And they also ran a club called Bedrock, which was an indie club. And Adrian said to Simon, what you should do is do a gay indie night, because there's a lot of gay people that come to our club and they love indie music. There's a real I think it was you could probably trace it back to people's love of Human League and Smiths and those kind of things. So there was a lot of gay people that didn't really want disco and house music at all. They wanted Indian rock and they loved that. So, but our club mixed up all kinds of things. So Adrian said to Simon, you should do like a gay indie night and just play all those indie records. So he set up a night called Pop Stars. Stars started, I think it was probably about 95, I suppose, that kind of period. And he set up this very successful 94, 95, I think. He set up this. So he'd been running indie nights, but they'd been kind of straight. So this gay indie night became a successful night. And then you had Ducky started up in 95, doing a similar thing that we did, but with a at the Vauxhall Tavern with a gay audience, aiming more at a gay audience. We didn't aim at anybody. We just said, the doors are open. You can come along. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't.
Yeah.
So we were open to all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds. But they went for more of a gay audience, and very successfully. And then you had a club called Club Skinny came along, and Shinky Shonky, and lots of different clubs came around that were being more experimental. Clubs, and it wasn't just about cruising and and trying to pick up and that kind of thing. So, and I think we were very much part of. We were the kind of forerunners of all that, and we played games at the club. We did musical bumps, musical statues, all kinds of different things.
Yeah, so talk me through how this actually works. So do you just stop the music and tell everyone, right, we're going to play musical statues now?
Yes. Well, we had Matthew Gilmore as the host, and Matthew Gilmore very, very strong and bossy. So it was like, right, you lot, come on the floor, we're going to do some exercises. So we'd do some exercises, or we'd have a band on, or we'd have a game. Sometimes we'd only plan it a couple of days before. We'd have a treasure hunt sometimes. We'd say, right, you get into teams and you have to go out and you have to come back with a bag of chips or a can of Coke or an oak leaf, all kinds of funny things. So you had all these people charging around town trying to find things. Then we'd do a conga. We'd do all that. It was just, we were just doing nutty things.
And so on a typical night, what would your role be?
Well, I'd start off on the door. So I used to do, I DJ'd and Michael Murphy DJ'd. So Michael would go on first and he'd play up until the act came on, or the performance or the band or games or whatever we were doing. And then I'd take over. But because we were popular, I used to go on the door with Adrian to make sure our mates got in, because we'd have these queues and we wanted our friends to come in, because there was a lot of people that came to the club in the early days, and we wanted to make sure that they could come jump into the front of the queue because they'd supported us when no one was down there. So I was just sort of hovered about the door, really, making sure, pulling people out that are dressed up, that made an effort, people that were friends, make sure they all got in, just that kind of thing. So I remember being on the door once, and Adrian had a phone call earlier that day saying Oasis were coming down, and we've been playing we played Supersonic. So Shake Maker had just come out. And I had a copy of that. We used to play Supersonic down there, and people liked it. So it was very early days for Oasis. And they were just in London, and they came to the club, and we knew they were coming, so we put them on the list. Anyways, they turned up, and just as they turned up, I'd recognise them. I think I'd seen them on the telly, or I'd just seen them live somewhere, something like that. So I knew who they were. A cab pulled up, and Matthew Gilmore got out of the cab in like some mad outfit. And he came, and Matthew was obsessed with people dressing up. You've got to dress up. You've got to dress up.
I think I know where this is going.
And then, so Oasis was stood on the door saying, "Oh, we're on the guest list for Oasis." And Matthew came out of the cab and said, "Right, you lot, who are you?" And they said, "Oh, we're Oasis." And Matthew turned to us and said, "You're not going to let them in, are you?" And we said, "Yeah, they're on the guest list. We like them. We play their record." And really? Right, you lot, next time you come down, make an effort. And then they'd all horrified and all kind of went into the club really sheepishly. And then came up and asked for their record. "Well, can you play our record?" I went, "Yeah, all right." So we played their record, and they danced about to their own record.
Wait, they danced around to their own record?
They were really... And then they come up and asked for the Beatles, and they were really, really sweet and completely intimidated by Matthew. And then they used to come every week. And then, of course, they sort of took off and started to get a little bit attitudey, but not much.
Wait,
not down.
A little bit attitudey?
Well, but the thing is, at the time, I mean, that was, you've got to remember, so while you've got all these kind of indie kids and all that going on, you've got Leigh Bowery down there in these big mad outfits, terrifying the life out of everybody, jumping up and down on the dance floor to Elastica. And so you had the freaks down there as well as the indie world. So it was you can't, Liam Gallagher, he isn't going to intimidate Leigh Bowery. So that was funny. But then, but as I said, they all started taking off. So I was on the door one night, and a cab pulled up, and Jarvis got out the cab with Damon Albarn and a couple of other people from Blur and Pulp. And they came over and said, "Oh, how you doing?" Well, yeah. And we're chatting to them. And they were waiting for another cab with a couple of the other members from the bands. The Pulp and Blur had been on, they'd just done something, I don't know, some filming, or they'd done something together. And Blur had just broken through with Parklife. Mm-hmm. Pulp still hadn't, it's pre-Common People. They'd been on Top of Pops with Babies, but it was, like lower top 20 hit. Anyway, so these girls were walking down Regent Street, saw Damon outside chatting to us, and started screaming, "Damon, Damon, Damon," and ran across the road, tried to chase him into the club. So we had to hold them back. And they were saying, "Damon, oh, we love Damon, Damon, Damon." And Jarvis was stood right next to them, and they completely ignored Jarvis. Interested. Within months, Common People came out, and then it was Jarvis, Jarvis, Jarvis. So it was quite interesting how the trajectory of those performers was so rapid.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to fuck with your head, right?
Yeah, because I don't think any of them were, as I said, because indie bands hadn't really got that level of success in this country. No one was really interested, and then suddenly the press were, and it was what one begat the other. So it all escalated quite quickly. Oh, I'm sure they later on. I mean, we finished in 96. We got to 1996, and we said, well, end of 96, we were so fed up with our mates getting hassled in the club, or it didn't really feel like a place that certain people could hang out in. And we just thought, you know what, we've done 5 years, we've had enough, and we finished it.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, what happened is people, when we went into all the gossip columns and everything, and featured about this club where all these bands hung out, people would come down to see the bands.
Uh-huh.
Or they didn't. They just came down because they wanted to be in the club with the music, and that was it, really. And so once it became like a sort of
tourist destination,
star spotter tourist destination, we were like, well, what's that? We didn't set out to be that, and we'd sort of done what we wanted to do, and that was it, really. So we finished it.
And so, do you remember the last night?
Not really. Kind of. Yeah, I mean, the last night, I think it was all right. It wasn't, I think by then we've done it every week for 5 years, and I think we were just sort of had enough. I think we finished around New Year's Eve. It was still good fun, but we could see it changing. It was only in the last sort of 6 months we just thought, you know what, it's time to finish, and yeah, it's funny, interesting you said that. I can't really remember the last night much at all, really. I just thought, well, that's it now.
But then what was that like afterwards, if like your life was wrapped up in that club and you were doing it every week, to suddenly not do it?
Well, I was getting loads of DJing work, doing other things. Matthew Glamore was doing Minty. I was touring with Pulp, DJing for them. There was lots of other things going on. Then I ran a bar with Adrian, and I was putting compilation albums out. And so I've had a career doing that since anyway. And I'd hate to think I was still doing smashing after all these years, I mean,
when was the last time you did a conga line, though?
Oh, actually, I've had a few conga. I've managed to get conga lines going a few times. Yeah, actually, I did a party for Anish Kapoor a few years ago, and I played something, and and it was in his studio, and I got them all doing the conga all around his sculptures, and that was good fun. So I can kind of do. I've got a few things that if you drop them at the right moment, the conga starts, And I had a birthday party last May, and we had a conga at the birthday party, so it can happen.
Oh, okay, fine.
What we used to do, because the club got to capacity, we used to do the conga out the fire exit, up Regent Street, then back down to to the fire exit, and people that were in the queue, we'd go, quick, get on the end of the conga. So they get on the end of the conga and come to the club. So it was a way of sneaking people in as well.
So I was gonna. So when there was that kind of problem with, like, the wrong type of clientele coming,
It wasn't the wrong type. It was just, it wasn't what we were about. We never set up. So we never set up to be like a celebrity club. And there was a few of those around. We just wanted a club for our mates to come and hang out and dance the music they like dancing to. So we had Prince turn up in a big limo, pulled up outside. The driver came over and said, "Oh, I've got Prince in the limo. He wants to come to the club." We said, "Oh, great." And he said, "Can you rope off a VIP area for him?" We went, "No." And everyone's VIP. And he wasn't disgruntled and drove off. But then we had Michael Stipe down there, Courtney Love, Keanu Reeves, all kinds of people. They never asked for a VIP area or any special treatment. They just come in and dance around with everyone else.
So you didn't implement any kind of door policy or anything in order to weed out people?
Dressing up, we encourage people. We didn't want people down there in jeans and t-shirts. We were very much into people dressing up. And that was it, really. And people, a lot of people, you've got to remember, it was a very different time. So I DJ out now, and young people are very open-minded. So in terms of genres, so you can play a bit of disco, a bit of house, a bit of rock, a bit of glam, a bit of indie, a bit of, you can play completely a bit of soul, a bit of Motown, a bit of Northern soul. You can play really across the board, and they all love it. What they all like is the hits, though. I mean, they don't like all the B-sides and the obscurities. They do tend to like the hits. They like things mashed up a bit. They like things remixed, but they do like a big variety. But when I grew up, I mean, I'm 54 now, people weren't like that. It was very tribal. So if you were punk, you like punk. If you liked reggae, you like reggae. If you like indie, et cetera, et cetera. So people were very narrow-minded. In those narrow minds, people did know every disco record going, every punk record going. They had a deep knowledge, but they were very narrow-minded. So what happened? So clubs would play rare groove, maybe disco, probably not. House club would play house music, disco club play disco. People were very specific. You might get one or two genres mixing up. Like they used to do a lot of jazz nights, and they'd play a bit of jazz and a bit of jazz funk and a bit of soul. But they wouldn't play punk as well, where we would really play across the board. So there was very few people that were of my generation, people that come into the club and people a bit younger, that were open like that. So you had to have a certain mentality to want to dance 1 minute to a breakbeat track, 1 minute, then to Beatles, then to David Bowie, then to a glam record, then to some weird electronic record, and then so there was all sorts of so many different things mixed up, and a bit of Giorgio Moroder, then a pulp record, there was so we'd only attract a certain type of mentality, really.
We didn't talk about what your go-tos are for DJing. So what songs that, if you hear them now, take you back to that club?
Well, there was one that I used to play called Black Right by Mandingo, which was on an album, the first album I compiled, called The Sound Gallery. And it was like a big orchestral, wild guitar freak out track. That was number smashing. Then there was a version of Jesus Christ Superstar, which was like an electronic version. He used to play that. Then Ping Pong by Stereolab. That was a track that used to get played a lot. Pulp, Sorted for Ease and Whiz, we used to play. Queen Bitch, David Bowie, X-Ray Specs, World Turned Day Glow, Giorgio Moroder, The Chase. There was a lot of, so it was quite a mixture of tracks. There was a track called EVA by Jean-Jacques Perret, which was like a Moog electronic track from 1970, which everyone liked. And then there was a track called Indian Vibes by Dave Pike, and that was a 60s sitar track, and people loved that. So, there was this weird mix of bits of hippie, bits of Sammy Davis Jr., it was a real mix of stuff, and you never really knew what was going to come next.
Yeah. Were there any songs that completely killed the vibe?
I think so. Yeah, there would have been. There'd definitely be ones that we'd put on and go, "Oh, that didn't really work." But I don't know. It was funny, But the thing is, quite often you'd play something because some of the music was quite nutty. You'd play something, and a few people would dance. Then you'd go, but you know what? I really liked hearing it. So you play it again next week, and then some more people would dance, and you go, actually, people were getting into this. And you play it again, and then more people would dance, and then then after about a month, it became the track of the club. For that little period.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, isn't it, DJing? Like you just have to sometimes be a bit bold with your decisions, and the crowd will come with you.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's kind of different now because I think people tend to want things that are more familiar to them now because of the way people listen to music, because of the whole, they'll just listen to a quick snippet of it on Spotify or Amazon, wherever. And
well, that's it. Like nothing's obscure anymore, is it? Like there's no songs that you find in a charity shop because you can find them all on Spotify.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can't do. I mean, we were hunting out stuff in the charity shops. That's where we were getting it all from. And then our mates who were coming to the club were bringing their records down. So, I mean, Jarvis turned up at the club with a test pressing of Common People, and he said, "Oh, I've got this for you." So I was the first person to play Common People out anywhere.
Oh wow!
And I've still got pressing here. And he did the same with Disco 2000. So we were the first people to play at the club. I was the first person ever to play Common People.
And did people know? Did the crowd know that it was a Pulp song, or?
It was very funny because quite often playing things like that, you had a sort of a mixed response, and you play it the next week, and then it'd be a bigger response, and then then it might got a bit of radio play because they used to pre-release a lot of stuff then before they came out, so people became aware. And remember, these are bands that used to gig a lot, so people would hear these songs. But Common People was one of those ones you put it on, and everyone went nuts. They all seemed to know it, or if they didn't know it, they loved it straight away. It was very instant, and it was one of those rare occasions that, because it's an old record, it's not like a disco record or anything. It's kind of the way it starts and builds, and it's got a narrative to it, which you don't normally get in pop songs. And they went crazy, and they always went crazy for it. So it was one of those ones that was a hit. And I was on the Pulp tour when that came out. So I went on this Common People Pulp tour around the country. And as it was climbing the charts and doing well, suddenly it was, Pulp suddenly started getting over attention. The dates were selling out, and, there was a little buzz about it. And Jarvis was getting a lot of focus, and, said, "Oh, can I meet Jarvis? I want to meet Jarvis." And so it was quite an exciting time to be in the middle of all that.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah, it's kind of unprecedented.
And as I said before, those indie bands did get quite a gay following. And as I said, there was a lot of female-led bands at the time. So like the Shampoos and Elastica and Sleeper and Echo Belly. And there was a lot of women in Britpop, or what became Britpop, that had started from that Riot Girl scene.
Yeah. So let's quickly talk about Shampoo. Were they ever in Smashing?
Always sat in the foot, looking grumpy. Yeah.
Oh, amazing!
And
They
Simon Menswear went out with one of them,
Oh,
Carrier.
really? Do you know, like, they've completely dropped off the face of the earth, so there's like nothing about like what they're up to now on the internet.
No, I don't know where they are. I'll have to ask around. They did. I put on a track on the album. I DJ'd for them as well. I DJ'd and a performance they did, a gig. I did because I DJ'd for all of those bands. I DJ'd for everyone.
Mm.
And the track I put on the album was the B side of Trouble.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
Don't
an amazing song. Yeah.
Great, which is a great track, and it sounds really good. And people, it's funny because when I told indie people that I was putting the album together, they were, oh, great, great, great. And I said Shampoo, and they were, oh no, I can't stand them. And then but then I played that track, and they went, oh, this is brilliant.
Yeah, they're like this.
Shampoo got a really bad rep.
Yeah,
As
because
being
of Trouble. Yeah.
corny and all that kind of thing. But those records sound great. And the production's really good. They're a really good attitude. They look great. And I think it's time for Shampoo rediscovery.
Yes, maybe we can start it.
Let's hope so, yeah.
Yeah, no, they're amazing. Like, you know, Viva La Mega Babes, what an amazing song.
Yeah, they were really good. And they were way ahead of, you see, what happened is, so as Britpop exploded, then what happened is that it sort of started to dip down a little bit, and then pop came up.
Yeah.
So pop, which had been pop had been sort of out for a long time, and then Spice Girls happened, Robbie Williams happened. There were lots of things that happened which became pop. So Shampoo were kind of like a blueprint for Spice Girls, Girls Aloud, all that kind of thing. They were just ahead of the game of that.
Yeah, just kind like a less sanitized version.
Yes, yeah, a less sanitized version. So, and it's like the Oasis were sort of, Robbie Williams kind of took what Oasis were doing and went, you know, hits with it, you know.
Yeah.
So that's to be that was the way it sort of happened. The pop came back, and indie sort of disappeared into the distance.
You said before that smashing was queer in a 90s way. What does that mean?
Because it was very inclusive. Our thing was, we didn't care where you were from, what your background was, what your sexuality was, or anything, or what your age was. It was, if you were open-minded and you had the right attitude, you could come in. So we had really odd people down there. We used to have this trans used to come down called Agent K, and she used to come down and with a briefcase and a trench coat on and a pair of glasses and a bob wig, and she'd sort of stand around, wander around, and then she'd leave a briefcase on the dance floor and then return and pick it up again, and then she'd leave it in different space, like she was some spy. She was called Agent K. Really odd. So you'd have people, and then the Leigh Bowery's jumping about, and then Pete Burns, all sorts of funny, just odd bunch of people, and then people like Boys Wonder and Shampoo and those sort of people as well. So it was queer in an acceptance and an attitude, where the 80s gay clubs, well, not gay clubs, the kind of so-called kind of gay run clubs like Blitz and Taboo, although they were freaky and dress up and flamboyant, they were very cliquey. Unless you were in that clique, you wouldn't get in. They were really strict on the door. You had to know people. It was all like that. Where we weren't. We were much more open, and it was like, you know, come in, don't come in, we don't care, but you have to accept what we're doing. If you don't like it, then fine. But if you do like it, then you're part of the gang. It wasn't about what you were wearing in terms of labels and that kind of thing, because most people were down there in charity shop clothes, you know. So it was a different type of attitude. It was much more inclusive, where the 80s club scene had been very exclusive.
Did you ever go to smashing? Well, if you did, I would love to hear from you. Please share any stories or anecdotes or photos that you have from that time through social media. You can find me on most platforms with the user handle KAndersonMusic. And you can find out more about Martin at his website, martingreensound.com. And also, an extra plug, his new compilation, Martin Green Presents Supersonic's 40 Junkshop Britpop Greats, is available now. Lost Spaces is not only a podcast, but a concept record as well. I've been writing songs about queer venues and the people who used to live their lives there, and will be releasing songs over the coming year. You can hear the first single, Well Groomed Boys, which is also playing underneath my talking right this very second, on all streaming platforms. If you liked this episode, I would really appreciate if you subscribed, left a review on Apple Podcasts, or just told people who you think might be interested in listening too. I am Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.